Environmental Science, Chapter 15, Video 2, Fate of Pollutants. Ultimately, most pollutants find their way into natural waters. This is inevitable given the dissolving power of water and its tendency to flow downhill. Water pollution problems are also characterized by the areas that become polluted. For example, fresh water can be surface waters, rivers, streams, or lakes, or groundwater, and marine systems can also become polluted. All three major sources of pollution, industry, agriculture, and cities, are situated along rivers. Sources, as we mentioned before, are classified as point sources if the pollution comes from a single identifiable source, and non-point sources if the pollution is a result of runoff over a wide area. Since rivers draw from many sources, they may contain many different pollutants. Point source pollution is the easiest type of river pollution to correct, and it can be traced to a single source. An industrial operation may accidentally discharge untreated pollutants into a river, or a flood at a wastewater treatment plant may cause sewage to flow into a waterway. These spills can be massive and release large amounts of pollutants over a short period of time, but once the problem is corrected, the river can eventually recover. Non-point source pollution is much more difficult to deal with. As rain or floodwater flows over land, it picks up any contaminants present, oil and grease from roadways, excess nitrogen and pesticides from farmland, heavy metals from mining and scraping operations, as well as loose sediment may find their way into the river, carried through the water cycle, and by runoff. Let's look at surface waters a little more closely. Compared to rivers, lakes are more easily polluted for three reasons. They have much slower circulation than the river system. They're contained, so they have pollutant accumulation. And they usually have lower volume for dilution than flowing rivers. In 1972, the Clean Water Act was a landmark legislative event leading to the substantial improvements of water quality in many U.S. rivers and lakes. While point source pollution is improving along many rivers, they are still threatened by non-point pollution sources and physical alterations. Groundwater contamination. Over 50% of the United States population depends on groundwater for drinking water. Groundwater is also one of our most important resources for water irrigation. Unfortunately, groundwater is also susceptible to pollutants. Groundwater contamination occurs when man-made products such as gasoline, oil, road salts, and chemicals get into the groundwater and cause it to become unsafe and unfit for human use. Materials from the land surface can move through the soil and end up in groundwater. For example, pesticides and fertilizers can find their way into groundwater supplies over time. Road, salt, toxic substances from mining sites, and used motor oil also may seep into groundwater. In addition, it's possible for untreated waste from septic tanks and toxic chemicals from underground storage tanks and leaky landfills to contaminate groundwater. Drinking contaminated groundwater can have serious health effects. Diseases such as hepatitis and dysentery may be caused by contamination from septic tank waste. Poisoning may be caused from toxins that have leached into well water supplies. Wildlife can also be harmed by contaminated groundwater. Other long-term effects, such as certain types of cancer, may also result from the exposure of polluted water. Here are some sources in Table 15.2 for groundwater pollution. Storage tanks may contain gasoline, oil, chemicals, or other types of liquid, and they can either be above or below ground. They're estimated to be over 10 million storage tanks buried in the United States, and over time the tanks can corrode, crack, and develop leaks. If the contaminants leak out and get into the groundwater, serious contamination can occur. Septic systems. On-site wastewater disposal systems used by homes, offices, and other buildings that are not connected to a city sewer system. Septic systems are designed to slowly drain away human waste underground at a slow, harmless rate. An improperly designed, located, construction, or maintained septic system can leak bacteria, viruses, household chemicals, and other contaminants into the groundwater, causing serious problems. Landfills. Landfills are the places where our garbage is taken to be buried. Landfills are supposed to have a protective bottom layer to prevent contaminants from getting into the water. However, if there's no layer or it's cracked, contaminants from the landfill, car battery acid, paint, household cleaners, etc., can make their way down into the groundwater. The groundwater pollutants with the greatest frequency and concentration in the U.S. are from agricultural runoff and include nitrates from fertilizer and pesticides that do not degrade or degrade slowly. Next are the volatile organic compounds such as industrial solvents, tetrachloroethylene and trichloroethylene, and benzene, as well as other petroleum products from gasoline and fuel leakages. Finally, metals and bacteria can also contaminate groundwater depending on the geology or above ground use. In Maine, arsenic in groundwater at high concentrations is a problem in two areas centered around Androscoggin and Kennebec counties, and then Hancock and Waldo counties, as you can see on this map from the USGS. Natural granite formations in these areas are high in arsenic that becomes mobilized when deep wells are dug into anaerobic groundwater. In addition to freshwater, marine waters can also become contaminated. They become contaminated from runoff and other land-based activities, which can cause algae blooms and make shellfish unharvestable. They can become contaminated from atmospheric pollution, like too much carbon dioxide, which causes ocean acidification and warming. They can become contaminated from maritime transportation, with bilge dumping, illegal bilge dumping and oil dumping, as well as spills out on the seas. They can become contaminated from barge dumping, from dredging of contaminated harbor sediments that are then taken out to sea and dumped. And they can also be contaminated from offshore oil production, where leaks are common and spills are the norm. In this section, we talked about why so many pollutants end up in water, mostly because water is a universal solvent, and everything that contains water runs downhill to a common body. We talked about why some bodies of water are more easily polluted than others, rivers versus lakes per se. And we also mentioned a couple of pieces of legislation that have passed to regulate pollutants in water. We want to know how groundwater pollution occurs. What are the major pollutants? Why is arsenic in groundwater an issue in Maine? And where does it occur? Also, we talked a little bit about how marine systems are polluted.